Welcome, my dear friends. It's great to see you again. I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. And we continue in a series that kind of does two of those things, because we're reviewing a role-playing game product, and we're getting to pick the brains of the main man behind Dungeons & Dragons, and so all of role-playing games thoughts in the process, because we are reading again from Gary Gygax's Role-Playing Mastery. Now this is our 4th episode and we're moving into chapter 3. In the previous episodes we've talked about what is role-playing in general, how should you think about it, what are role-playing games in general, what's the industry like, how can you be the best player you can be, and in this one we're going to move further on as Gary continues to build the blocks that'll lead to role-playing mastery with Chapter 3, The Master GM. Many, if not all, the persons who purchase this book are both game masters and players in one or more campaigns. Although this book began by addressing the subject of mastery as if there were a sharp division between game masters and players, and the first material given on the general subject of mastery in Chapter 2 was aimed at the player instead of the GM, there is a good reason for that approach. It is easier to express most of the principles of good play and mastery of a game through references to the act of playing than it is to begin by detailing what the game master must be and do in order to attain what is defined herein as mastery. It is a much greater task to be a good game master than it is to be a good player, and the latter is included in the former. After having read this far, you know the requirements for the player striving toward mastery. What follows here is a description of what the game master must know and do in pursuit of mastery. As you will see, some of this advice is expressed in terms of what a good GM is not, for often it is by accentuating the negative that we can more precisely define the positive. The creator, organizer, and arbiter of all. First, a motivated individual, the GM-to-be, examines the choices of game products available. Based on his interest and the interests of others he hopes to include in the activity, he selects a game, studies it, prepares the materials necessary for ongoing participation by a group of player participants, and then begins recruiting others to associate themselves with the game as presented by him, his campaign. With this first bit of work completed, the would-be GM must approach the next steps with the proper attitude. How he perceives his role in the scheme of things and how he presents himself to his potential players are critical. Creation of the campaign world is a GM's first significant expenditure of independent creative effort. After he has fully acquainted himself with the rules of the game and the possibilities that those rules allow for. Before one bit of world designing work is to be done, however, the GM must have a clear sense of his proper role in the playing group. And that is why the following bit of guidance precedes any discussion of campaign creation. Players and GMs alike take heed. Despite misguided perceptions to the contrary, the game master is not the enemy of the player characters. At least he shouldn't be. Those unenlightened or unscrupulous would-be GMs who take this stance of hostility towards PCs, or worse yet, towards players, won't be around long anyway, for their players will desert them in short order. Who then opposes a player's game personas? The GM does indeed have the duty of effecting opposition and posing problems, but not on a person versus person or person versus character basis. He does this by playing the parts of the various beings who are adversarial to the PCs engaged in the challenge posed by the session on a character versus character basis to distinguish it from the other forms of interaction just named. In addition to being the architect of the world in which the PC's adventures take place, the Game Master is also the representative of all the opposing creatures, forces, and phenomena that strive to keep the PCs from achieving their desired ends. This opposition must be personified in such a way as to present the maximum challenge for PCs and their players while not being so overwhelmingly powerful that any PC who dares to resist or combat the opposition is smeared flat when he makes his first move. This approach is valid and important even in the first stages of campaign creation. For instance, a GM who designs a world where the environment itself is fraught with naturally existing perils is asking for trouble. The point is to challenge the PCs, not kill them outright. The game tells what the nature of challenges within its scope will be, but there is usually no direct information as to the specific objective of each play session. The GM who develops a campaign milieu, take a drink, will devise these objectives singularly or in conjunction with material supplied for this purpose by the publisher of the rule system. What sorts of challenges are appropriate? How stiff should the opposition be? Generally, these are questions the GM will answer by examining the game materials, assessing the prowess of the PCs and their players, and then selecting and combining elements of the game rules and the milieu so that the strength of the opposition is tailored to the capabilities of those who will contest against it. Through the examples and information set forth in your game of choice, the challenges in the game should be evident. In narrowly defined genres such as espionage, mystery, crime detection, and historically based games, the possibilities will be easily determined. In those games in which imagination is free to roam, fantasy, horror, science fiction, then only the most general information about the challenges can be given, although the material for a specific game might infer more. The division is clear in either case. In some systems, the major problems for PCs to overcome will be of a cerebral nature, with conflict of this sort paramount. In others, there will be more actual adversaries who must be combated through physical means. Human opponents usually will fall within the range of possibilities open to player characters, although some exceptional and rare superhuman types might be allowed to the GM for use against skilled players with powerful PCs. Because RPG systems deal with make-believe, all adversaries are simply sets of statistics plus descriptive data included to personify them for participants, especially for the GM, since it is he who must take the part of each such creature and roleplay it. Unlike a player character, an opponent is typically not nurtured and considered over long periods of time. When one appears, it is skimmed over and then played at by the GM. The greater the number of opponents appearing, the more difficult it is for the game master to represent them properly, even if the foes appear sequentially rather than all at once. Imagine, if you will, the demands placed upon you as a player if you were expected to operate even a dozen PCs expertly during the course of a game session. Initially, the GM is the driving force that begins the campaign. His major creative effort is the development and upkeep of the game milieu through the campaign. Even on its simplest level, a small area in which limited game-related activity can take place, the task he has set about is monumental. In fact, if most GMs understood just what the creation of a complete campaign world entails, it is probable that the overwhelming nature of the whole would deter them from starting. Fortunately for all concerned, the magnitude of the campaign milieu and its attendant requirements are not conveyed, and perhaps cannot be, to the uninitiated. Work commences, a scenario for play is readied, and the next step, assembling a group of players, is taken. Many times, the preparations for assembling a group of players and having them engage in a play session have been made parallel to the creation of the first portion of the campaign world. Then the first session begins. Players are introduced to the game and its concepts. Some goal, objective, or end is conveyed. The players busy themselves creating their characters, and then the first episode of actual play in the campaign finally gets underway. While players are learning about the game, the GM's expression of the game through his campaign expression and the dynamics of their group, the GM is also gaining knowledge. He learns what he knows and doesn't know with respect to the game system. He begins to find places where the system is silent or vague on some point that warrants attention. He also discovers how little of the campaign milieu he has actually created with his intensive efforts to date. Because the game seeks to reflect actual life, the campaign world has a scope equal to that of the universe. That is, most probably infinite. Fortunately, the GM needs only to create and develop details according to the rate the player group progresses and demands such details. Just as fortunately, the game master has the game itself to work with, accessory products to aid him in filling out the milieu, and the cooperative assistance of other GMs and players, including his own. The task of creating the game world is tremendous, nonetheless. Let's follow an example to see just how demanding the exercise is. The genre of the game is action-adventure in the early part of the 20th century, let's assume from 1900 through about 1935 or so. Our GM decides that the campaign setting will begin in San Francisco. The quest problem will be to discover the cause of a series of murders and mysterious disappearances in that city. Knowing that player participants will be allied with the forces of law, the GM now has 3 immediate tasks. First, he must develop a reasonable set of circumstances in which crimes have been committed. Second, he must develop the structure and motives of the group responsible for these crimes, detail all the minions of the group who will oppose the player group's game personas, and then determine what clues and leads this sinister combination of non-player characters, NPCs, would inadvertently or deliberately leave behind. Third, the GM must develop the allied law enforcement and government officials and other concerned individuals who will aid or impede the progress of the PCs. With this group must be intermixed a mass of neutral persons, places, and things, the background within which the whole quest will operate. What does all this mean in concrete terms? For starters, the GM must have a reasonably detailed and accurate map of the whole San Francisco Bay Area circa 1920, to pick a date at random. Another map showing all streets in the city proper is also needed. Drawings and photographs of the place are necessary for play. How else will the whole campaign take on an aura of reality? From these actualities, some area for the major activity must be decided upon. Thereafter, a small-scale fictitious map can be drawn. This must show special buildings, who resides there, or what business activity is transacted therein, secret places, hidden exits, and who knows what else as demanded by the scenario devised. Is this enough to begin play with? Oh no, we're just getting warmed up. For the sake of this little exposition, let's assume that the murders and one of the disappearances took place in Chinatown, an exotic and mysterious place sure to start the heart of the intrepid romantic beating at a faster pace. There will be suspicions of opium being somehow involved, and the complication of a Tong War, conflict between opposing Chinese gangs or secret societies, taking place so that one's life is truly at risk when a stranger, read PC, enters the area. Then there will be a revelation. Witnesses to the most recent crime, reliable ones at that, will state that they are sure the perpetrators were Caucasian, not Oriental. The PCs will have to investigate, and only by carefully analyzing the information gained will they begin to suspect that the whole affair involves much more than a bit of murder and kidnapping. The plot thickens. The GM decides that a group of Chinese disguised as Caucasians killed a relative non-entity simply to throw a possible investigation into the real motives of their past crime off the track. The Tong War is real, but controlled, allowed to happen by the criminal mastermind behind the whole ghastly affair. The murders were of persons opposing the plots and machinations of the mastermind. The disappearances are of persons this criminal genius means to bend to his will for one reason or another. Knowledge, influence, or employment in a portion of his nefarious scheme to dominate the world? What a cast of characters, what action! Into this boiling cauldron are tossed the unsuspecting player participants, eagerly and enthusiastically moving their PCs about in an effort to solve the mystery of the scenario. Little do they know that at best they can only foil completion of this particular scheme. If they perform to the maximum, they can come out with their PC still alive, gain some rewards, and have the beginning of an understanding about what they're facing. A worldwide conspiracy, the goal of which is for all non-Caucasians to rule the world. This dark plot is under the direction of none other than the most fiendish and intelligent man ever to live, Fu Manchu. Of course, should the group succeed in checking this minor activity of his, the sinister doctor will still carry on other schemes, each and every one of which is darker and more threatening, and he will be aware of the newly come foes as well. Oh, is right. The GM has surely set a task for his players and for himself. Let's forget about peopling the activity area with villains and disinterested civilians who might know something. Let's even pass over the society of San Francisco, the subculture of Chinatown, and the details of everyday life in 1920. Let's move on to the big picture. Where is the headquarters of good old Fu? Does he have other strongholds? Where? Who are his lieutenants? His soldiers? What is the plan he has? We know the goal, but what about objectives and ends? Where will the trail lead from San Francisco? How will data on principal places of action be found? Think of it. Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, Paris, Shanghai, Cairo, Istanbul, Calcutta, New York, and the list goes on. Lost knowledge, lost civilization, secret science, strange drugs, cults, and who knows what else must be fabricated or researched, or both. Oh yes, does anyone know the cost of train travel between Paris and Bucharest in 1920? What about the price of first-class passage on a steamer from San Francisco to Tokyo? And while we're at it, how long does this journey take? That sums up the background and details needed for setting up a campaign goal, setting forth objectives, defining ends, and quantifying everything through play scenarios of one sort or another. From this date, the GM will be able to role-play the characters encountered by the PCs, which are referred to as non-player characters or NPCs, remembering that those of outstanding ability and those who will have continuing parts in the unfolding story will have to be extensively detailed to enable intelligent play. With this wealth of information in his mind or at his fingertips, the GM then presents it, serves as the sensory organs of each and every PC, plays the parts of every creature encountered by the PCs, and keeps track of it all at the same time. The Game Master is a creator, organizer, and arbiter of all. His most important functions during play, though, are more mundane. He is nature. He provides sensory data. And finally, he fills in by playing the roles of living things the PCs interact with during the course of a session. With such an investment on an emotional as well as intellectual level, the GM is prone to be something other than a disinterested party. Although disinterested and impartial, he must remain if it is at all possible. If the GM must succumb to a certain amount of emotional and preferential behavior, and it is virtually impossible not to do this, he should manifest these qualities not by desiring to see the PCs fail, so that the players become discouraged and, heaven forbid, cease play. Instead, he should be eager for the players to do so well with their PCs that they utilize every aspect, explore every bit of detail, and meet and overcome every obstacle that he has so painstakingly put into the scenario and the surrounding campaign. The dedicated GM is not only an impartial judge of events, but at the same time, he is an active force championing the cause of both the preservation of PCs not bent on self-destruction, I've met some of them, and the continued satisfaction of players who do not seek to see the campaign ruined. Conversely, he has no ethical or moral obligation to keep a PC alive and viable if that character's player insists on leaping into the jaws of adversity. I've known some of them, and he owes it to himself and the others in the group to discipline or dismiss a player who has a selfish and treacherous attitude toward the campaign. To reiterate, the Game Master is not an enemy, neither is he by nature adversarial. He desires successful play by participants when their play is kept within specified limits and as long as it promotes the ongoing nature of the campaign. Being human, no GM can desire otherwise, considering the effort expended to bring the campaign into play and keep it there. If players were more aware of the multiple concerns of the GM, they would do more to assist him in times of need. Although many players also participate in campaigns of their own as game masters, they often do not allow this knowledge to feed them when they are acting in the other role. Perhaps this is because they believe their own attitudes are unique. As in real life, though, experiences are more universal than many realize. This is true of game mastering and playing alike. To be a truly masterful GM, the individual must have experienced extensive participation in one or more RPGs as a player. Otherwise, how can the needs and wants of that group be understood by the GM? In keeping with this attitude, there are times when the GM will bend or break the rules of the game in order to allow his players to maintain their characters. Just as he sometimes metes out punishment for infractions, the GM at other times intervenes benevolently, spreading his aegis over the PCs to save them from probabilities gone awry. To put it bluntly, when play is at a low ebb, or it is quite likely that the player characters are about to suffer undue loss or extinction, the GM cheats and decrees otherwise. Opponents miss their blows, PCs manage to strike their foes, and various sorts of miracles occur. This is wrong only when it is done too liberally or when it is unwarranted. If the PC party is in danger of extermination through no direct fault of its own, and because a string of unlikely occurrences have all somehow come to pass, then this is the time for the GM to step in and set things back on the right track, or at least keep them from getting any worse, increasing the excitement of play. As the hours of playing time in a campaign accumulate, the skill of the players increases and the burden of devising different and more demanding problems comes before the game master. It is a simple enough matter for the GM to arrange for the PCs to encounter new, more powerful foes, but it's often more desirable, although often more difficult, to introduce instead complexities in the task of overcoming the old ones. Problems that have nothing to do with fighting or overcoming enemy creatures also need to be considered and placed into the campaign. These may take the form of labyrinths and mazes to be negotiated, mysteries to be solved, and information or objects to be gathered, riddles to be interpreted, and who knows what else. All this creative energy is required because your efforts stimulated the players, now becoming a team, into action. Now they expect, nay, demand, more and better excitement. You must provide them with quests and problems that stretch them even further. Your imagination and creativity are taxed to the fullest in order to meet the players' demands for challenges that will make them utilize their ingenuity and imagination. This cycle is ongoing for a considerable period of time. During the course of the spirals of play, when the players begin at a point beneath the ability of the GM and gradually meet and surpass the game master's apparent level, only to be outfoxed again by the wily GM, more time and effort are called for. GMs can be thankful that there are published materials to assist them in the never-ending search for new ideas, and the game group itself is a marvelous source of inspiration to the game master. You respond to the players' needs by revising and expanding the campaign milieu. First, they may demand more intense and detailed combat frequently. Then they might find more esoteric approaches to unusual problems more interesting. You address these preferences as soon as you become aware of the trend. Here is where your first real test of game mastering ability confronts you. The wishes of the play group might well be contrary to the goal of the game, and you must find a way to satisfy the players while not compromising that goal. The desires of the players might violate the spirit of the game system. And again, one or two vocal and strong-willed participants might suggest a course that others are uncertain of or not actually interested in. In all such cases, the superior game master protects the campaign first and foremost. Responding to the needs of the playgroup does not mean you must cater to destructive desires or condescend to fulfilling whims. But at the same time, you must make every effort to tailor the campaign so that it accommodates the player's interest as much as possible without allowing them to determine its intent or direction. Allowing players to bring in fresh ideas and creativity is a manifestation of natural growth within the campaign. The cycles spoken of earlier are part of group dynamics, and the synergism of the player group assists in enabling the GM to develop material with which to continually confound and amuse the players. Their play and expressed comments are of great importance. It is, in fact, the shenanigans of the PCs that inspire some of the most determined efforts of the GM to prevent them from getting away with any future hijinks of that sort. The difficulty arises when players try to revise the game system, violate the spirit, or make the campaign into a playground as opposed to a testing ground for their game personas. The following two paragraphs describe alterations that, in my estimation, Gary's, would cause much more harm than good if they were introduced into an AD&D game campaign. They are provided here as examples of what not to try in the name of campaign betterment. Players have tried to convince me to allow the use of gunpowder in my AD&D game campaign. From one standpoint, the thought is tempting. Just imagine kobolds, the most inconsequential of humanoid monsters, armed with Uzi submachine guns. Now, there's a monster that will strike terror in the heart of even the most powerful PC. Likewise, regenerating trolls plying bayoneted rifles might be a pure joy to the harassed dungeon master, looking for a way to put self-important PCs in their place. But the game is medieval fantasy, and the spirit is magic, not technology. Despite my, unexpected by the players, temptation to allow its use just to show them, the idea had to be rejected. The time spent in dealing with it and then having them reject it would be wasted. In both the D&D and AD&D games, the spell-using power of PCs is controlled through the use of a system that requires study and memorization of magic spells before they can be cast. Then, once a spell is used, the ability to cast it is erased from the character's mind until that character again takes time to study and memorize the particular spell. Well, some years back, there arose a line of thinking that asserted that magic in a fantasy game was best expressed in terms of spell points. Characters should be able to cast a certain spell often or repeatedly, with each usage simply costing the caster a specified number of points from his magical ability. The D&D and AD&D games were criticized harshly by advocates of this approach for being behind the times. The fad lasted for a time, with spellcasters spewing forth streams of sorcerer's stuff as if they were magical Gatling guns. Everyone wanted to be a magic user of that sort, but what could stand before such a character? How much fun is a game in which any challenge or problem can be overcome by calling up yet another spell from a seemingly limitless storehouse of energy? Goodbye, spell point magic system. This is not a condemnation of the idea of using a point system, but the point system, as advocated, did not fit the D&D or AD&D game system spells, rules, assumptions, or spirit. The idea is workable still, but needs its own body of surrounding material to operate effectively. The role of the game master requires that a constant vigil be kept to see that the game campaign vehicle is maintained for use by the group for as long a time as they so desire. Destruction of the campaign through error, whether advertent or inadvertent, illustrates a total lack of any ability. It violates the first tenet of being a game master: knowing, understanding, and respecting the game system and spirit. The foregoing sentence must be taken for what it's worth. The game, any RPG, exists to provide entertainment for those who find such a pursuit enjoyable. The campaign expression of the game system exists because the creator, its game master, and later its players wish it to. Thus, the campaign serves a singular play group, not the game system or other play groups outside the campaign. The tenets of GM mastery. The attitude of the master GM is always positive. When he looks at a situation laden with problems, he sees opportunities instead. For every problem, no matter how severe, implies the existence of an opportunity in the form of a solution. He knows the game, his campaign, and the individuals and their PCs who form the group. He works hard to serve the group and is served in turn by each participant. The selflessness of the GM's role is made satisfying by the anecdotes, spoken and unuttered, of those who enjoy his campaign. There's a special bond between GM and players, just as there is one between GMs who conduct campaigns based on the same genre. When the GM moves from being master of his own campaign to being a masterful GM, he extends himself to encompass all aspects of the gaming community. He might never attain the status of master player with respect to tournament play, but in all other respects, the master GM is the epitome of both mastery in play and game mastering. To conclude this chapter, just as the previous one was brought to a close, following are enumerated the tenets that a game master must embrace in order to achieve mastery of his craft. 1. The game exists to provide entertainment on an ongoing basis. The key words here are entertainment and ongoing. The RPG activity must be entertaining, exciting, challenging, and fun at the same time, or else no one in the group will desire to continue participating. And following from that last thought, any role-playing game must be an ongoing, continuing activity in order for its full potential as a means of entertainment to be realized. Player characters are not created so that they can live through 1 or 2 brief episodes, and a campaign world is not designed for the sake of a few isolated hours of activity. If the effort that goes into playing is not to be wasted, the play must extend over a long period of time so that the effort invested can realize a return. 2. The individual campaign is an interpretive extension of the game it is based on, aimed at activity by a small group. The rules of a game describe a genre or a general situation in which game activity takes place. It is up to the game master to apply the principles and generalities given in the rules by creating a unique campaign environment in which those generalities are brought to life, according to his sense of what sort of atmosphere will make for exciting and entertaining play. When he is creating his campaign, the GM must keep in mind that the realities of the world must be described in terms that can be appreciated and acted upon by a small group of player characters. If the world or some part of it is in peril and must be saved, the danger must not be something that can only be successfully combated by an army, because the players most likely do not and should not have an army at their disposal. 3. The creative interpretation of a campaign must remain within the scope and spirit of the game. This is a similar point to Tenet 2, but different enough and important enough to warrant a separate place on the list. It has to do not so much with the campaign setting, but with the nature of the challenges placed within that setting that must be met and ideally overcome by the PCs. For example, in an AD&D game campaign, player characters cannot legitimately be challenged by invaders from outer space, because that sort of challenge lies outside the scope of the game. The challenge cannot be something that requires the PCs to use the same methods used by the evil opposition in order to combat that evil to be even better than the bad guys, because that violates the spirit of the game. 4. The campaign is constantly undergoing modification through game master and player interaction. When the principal characters in a story, the campaign, are free-willed and have a multitude of choices regarding how to proceed, it is counterproductive and in fact impossible to preordain just how the events of the campaign will unfold. Any successful campaign must be flexible, and its creator must be open to changes. Not only the changes that he perceives are necessary, but those that are directly or indirectly suggested by the preferences and actions of the players and the PCs. The result of ongoing modification is a campaign that at any point reflects and fulfills the desires and inclinations of the players as well as the GM. 5. The role of Game Master is that of an active, neutral, with duty first to the campaign, then to the group, and then the game. First and foremost, the campaign must not only persevere but thrive. If it does not, then the group will founder and dissolve. Second, and a close second it is indeed, comes the interest of the group, specifically the player group. The members must be allowed and even encouraged to act in any way they see fit, as long as such action does not contravene the direction or the objective of the campaign. Third, but by no means unimportant, is the game system itself. The scope and the spirit of the game are inviolate and will remain so as long as the campaign remains dedicated to those ideals, as it always should. But the rule structure of the game is not and should not be immune to alteration. If the rules stress, for instance, combat over problem solving, but the campaign and the group happen to lean in the other direction, then the GM is obliged to add to and from the rule structure selectively to reflect the aspects that the group desires the rules to focus on. In specific cases in which the PCs are in jeopardy because the rules of the game have worked against them through a rare succession of unlikely and adverse occurrences, the GM is within his rights to override the provisions of the rules for the sake of guaranteeing, for the moment at least, the continued survival and viability of the player characters. In all cases, the GM must do his best to remain disinterested while retaining the power of absolute arbiter. If he allows his personality and emotion to creep into his methods of administering the campaign, he must do so with the intention of giving the PCs their best chance of success, as long as the players willingly and enthusiastically confront all the challenges that have been placed before their characters. 6. The Game Master serves best when he enables players to participate actively to their fullest. Following this maxim entails designing scenarios that will test PCs without overwhelming them, that will require the involvement of every PC in the participating group, and that will implicitly encourage each player to play his PC's role in character, instead of being tempted or compelled to deviate from that role in the interest of gaining some short-term benefit. Everyone in the group, including the GM, gets the most enjoyment out of a role-playing game when all participants share as equally as possible in the activity and when they all remain faithful to their chosen or designated roles in doing so. 7. Total mastery of a game system is desirable for game master and players alike. Self-evident on the surface, but a point worth elaborating upon nonetheless. A GM who has achieved mastery is in the best possible position to give the players in his group an exciting and enriching experience by all the means and for all the reasons described elsewhere in this book. And the Game Master, who works so hard and long to provide players and PCs with the best he can give them, deserves the same consideration and the same benefits from the players with whom he interacts. A playing group composed entirely of master players plus a master GM has reached the pinnacle of RPG achievement. Once they have reached that peak, the members of that group should have no difficulty, and not incidentally, more than a little fun, in staying there. And that's what we have for part 3. I've got thoughts on everything that he talked about, but to leave some room in the conversation for you to drop your own thoughts in the comments below, I'm just going to share a couple of these that I have personally encountered a bit too much. When Gary brings up the concept of too challenging a problem for your players and their characters to possibly do anything about, it sucks. Well, it's fine to have big world-ending powers and enemies in a game. What the player characters should be doing with those things is different depending on the level of the player characters. If they're low level and maybe the big bad just shows up for flavor, maybe he slaps them around a little bit and then leaves while the PCs go grind and do what they got to do to eventually get revenge on the big bad. But if the big bad keeps showing up and punking them and there's nothing they can do about it, that blows. And when Gary was talking about the players who are seemingly hell-bent on destroying their own characters and the campaign writ large, I've encountered a distressing amount of those. These are folks who, I don't know why they play how they do. Maybe they don't know what they're doing, but they seem intelligent enough to be able to master what technical aspects of play are. Or if there's some self-destructive, suicidal vein in their soul that drives them to do this, and in the process screwing over them, screwing over the other players, and screwing over the guy who went through all the effort to make the game for them to play, not trash. But they're out there. So if you're watching this and you've ever been accused of or thought that you might be this player, take it seriously and straighten up and fly right, my man. Those are the kind of players that make a DM swear off the screen and to never do it again. Why? Because the effort wasn't worth it. It's a lot of work, and if it all gets shot up by some player acting like a complete idiot or hatchet man, why bother? And so those are my thoughts. Again, I ask that you put yours in the comments so we can talk about it. Do you have lessons for the Game Master to add to what Gary had to say? I'd love to see it. Well, let's keep the conversation going. Share this around to folks. Let's do our own part in contributing to the conversation of what makes a good player, what makes a good Game Master, what makes the best game we can possibly make. Also remember to like and subscribe. I do like it when you do that. My dear friends, as we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best. Well, I already hate it because Dungeon Masters are superior to GMs. GM, Game Master, or General Manager. I am a Dungeon Master. Sometimes a storyteller, but I am a Dungeon Master. It makes a difference. I live to inspire fear in my players, and for some reason they keep coming back. So they must enjoy it. A Game Master, that sounds like an arbiter over a dispute in Candyland.